Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about An Ice Cold Mother Part 2. Today we're talking about the life of Shonda Vander Ark. Now, by the time Shonda was 20 years old, she would no longer be in an abusive relationship with her stepfather. I'm not really sure how the relationship fizzled out or ended things, but by the time she was 20, she was no longer with her stepfather or doing anything with her stepfather for that matter, and she would begin talking to a man named Eric Ferguson. And the two would quickly get married. And very shortly into the marriage, Shonda would get pregnant, and the two would actually have 4 kids within their marriage. It should also be noted that they didn't really have the kids back to back per se, but they would have each child every 2 years. Shonda would first get pregnant when she was 20 years old, and she would give birth to a son, and they would name him Nolan. Then when Shonda was 22 years old, she would get pregnant again, and they would have a son, and she would name him Paul. Paul would be very significant to this story. 2 years later, when Shonda was 24, she would get pregnant again, but this time she would give birth to a daughter, and she would name her Millie. And then finally, 2 years later, she would get pregnant again at 26, and she would give birth to a son and name him Timothy. And Timothy would be the child that this story is about. And you would think that as hard as she tried to get pregnant throughout her life, and keep in mind, she had been trying to get pregnant as early as 16 with her own stepfather. And my own personal belief is the relationship fizzled out, as by the time she was 20, she still wasn't able to get pregnant. So she would end that relationship and move on to the next person, which would be Eric Ferguson. And they would begin starting a family. And you would think, as much as she wanted to have a family, that she would take the family life pretty seriously. But unfortunately, Shonda just wanted nothing to do with any of her kids. Not only would she want nothing to do with any of her 4 kids, she would actually refer to them as all being a burden. And the entire time these kids lived, they would never know any type of love from their own mother. But instead of actually spending time with her kids and giving them love and nurturing them and being what we would consider an actual mother, she would actually spend most of her time sitting on the couch and writing erotic novels. And a lot of these amateur novels that she would write would mostly consist of different fetishes and fantasies that she had. But that's not the only thing she would do. It is said that she would take time after writing these novels, that she would take her children and place them around the couch and would actually read her erotic sex books to her children. And it's around this time that Timothy started showing signs of having multiple disabilities. And at an early age, he would actually be diagnosed with having autism, ADHD, sensory impairment, and speech impairment. And this should have been the thing that really made Shonda step it up in being a decent mother, but this wouldn't change anything. She really just did not care. She didn't want to take the time to help Timothy throughout any of his disabilities. And this in part is why Timothy would struggle with a lot of different things on a day-to-day life. And he would go around, he did not like loud noises, he had trouble processing information, and he would have a lot of hard time like building friendships and bonds with other kids at school. But Shonda didn't care about Timothy's disabilities, nor did she have any desire to help him through his disabilities. And her idea of taking care of her children is to go out and purchase a bunch of CCTV cameras, and she would actually place them around the house so that she could actually watch all of her kids at the convenience of her couch while she sat there and would write her sex books. And take a note about the CCTV cameras. This will become extremely significant later on down the road. Now, by the time that Timothy was from 3 years old to 6, Shonda would actually become heavily investigated by CPS. Not only would CPS be informed that Shonda was physically abusing her kids, but they would also get reports that Shonda was also sexually abusing her children. During this investigation, they would find that even though Shonda had not sexually done anything with her children, she would be caught doing a lot more, like placing her children on her lap and would be inappropriately or sexually touching her children. They would find out about the erotic novels and her reading these sex books to her children. CPS would also find out that Shonda was purchasing corn and playing these films in front of her children. And luckily, CPS found out all this stuff that was going on within the household, and they would actually terminate Shonda's parental rights by 2012. And they would even tell Shonda that she had to give up all rights to her children, and she would have to move out of the house. And she could not be anywhere near her children unsupervised, and was actually only allowed to spend a total of about 3 hours a week with her children. They would also tell her that she would have to pay child support, and Shonda would do all this. It's said that shortly after Shonda would leave the residence, Eric would actually divorce Shonda, and Shonda would actually call Eric and would actually request that he get her pregnant again so she could secretly raise a child. But Eric would completely refuse this, and she would make it seem like she wanted to have a kid because she missed her kids so much. And after Eric would refuse, Shonda not only would quit all communication with Eric, she would actually quit talking to all 4 of her kids altogether, and they would not hear from her for years later. Shortly into the divorce, Eric would begin seeing and dating a woman named Trisha. And shortly into the marriage, Eric would tell Trisha to take her 2 kids and move into the house with them. And now we would have Eric and his wife Trisha, her 2 kids, Nolan, Paul, Millie, and Timothy, all living under the same roof. And all the kids would be neglected, but the one that would be neglected the most would be Timothy. And Timothy's teachers would actually take notice of how neglected Timothy was. And not only would they notice that he was being neglected, but they would notice that he would come to school extremely dirty and hungry. And the teachers would realize he wasn't having any of his needs met. And not only was he not having his needs met, he wasn't even having his clothes washed. He wasn't been given baths. He wasn't being fed. He would come to school every single day stinking, to the point that the teachers would actually talk to the administration and allow Timothy to take baths at school. And while he was taking a bath, they would actually take his clothes and wash them for him. They would even begin giving him as much snacks as they possibly could to feed Timothy. But Timothy wasn't just hungry for food. He was starving for affection. And that was the one thing that the teachers noticed about Timothy, was he really doted on his teachers because they were just giving him simple kindness that he was missing out his whole life. The teachers would notice that he just responded to any kind of praise they gave Timothy. And this in turn made Timothy want to do well in school. He loved going to school. And he would always tell his teachers he just wanted to do a good job for them. And a lot of times being emotional while telling his teachers this. And it was very apparent to the teachers that he was very emotionally stunted. And the teachers would find out more bad news about Timothy. They would not only find out he was being neglected and starved, but they would also hear rumors that Timothy was being sexually abused by his brother Paul.